All right, welcome back, everybody. As we wait for a verdict in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard defamation trial, we're going through some critical testimony that you might have missed in this case. Or just to recap, because one of the witnesses that we haven't had a chance to really talk about as of recently is Isaac Baruch. This is you could say a fan favorite. A lot of people liked his testimony. This is clearly a friend of Johnny Depp's. He says he was also a friend of Amber Heard's. And you could say, you know, his testimony might have been a little bit biased towards Johnny Depp. But there was an interesting part of his commentary when he talked about overhearing a phone call between Depp and Heard. And he was with Johnny Depp at his apartment at the time of the call. Let's hear what he had to say.
Can you describe the arguments that you witnessed?
The first argument that I remember was walking in. It was a telephone argument. Johnny's at the kitchen table and he's screaming about something, and on the other line, because it's on speaker, and he's talking with the phone at the phone. The other person is Amber. And that she's in New York, and he's at the kitchen table, and they're arguing. And he's going, who is it? Who is it? And she's saying, oh, baby, come on, please don't. What are you doing, baby? Why are you being like this, baby? And this went on for a little while, and I'm listening, and then he hangs up. She calls back again, and it's the same thing. Who is it? What's going on? Who is it? And she's saying, oh, come on, baby, don't be, what are you doing, baby? And then hang up the phone again. The third time it happens, I'm saying, there's no solution in this conversation. I grabbed the phone from him and I says, hey, Amber, this is Isaac. Listen, this conversation is now over. And I hung up the phone. And she didn't call back again, and he went to the couch and went to bed.
And you wonder why he's a fan favorite. So regardless, other than that, you know, this seemed to be kind of a microcosm of what we saw throughout this trial. A lot of people who overheard or saw verbal altercations or problems with the couple, but there was really only one witness, Whitney Enriquez, who saw a physical, well, actually saw Johnny Depp physically attack Amber Heard. And I'm curious what you make of the totality of these witnesses who said that they observed injuries, they observed, you know, their testimony would insinuate physical violence by Depp against Heard. But each one of them had a different kind of experience. And I'm curious, when you look at it in totality, what you make of it.
So I think the totality of the evidence has to come in consideration of all of the reports, all of the experts, all of the actual, I would say, evidence that isn't just someone's opinion or people's sort of ideas of what happened. There were some very charismatic witnesses, such as, who we just saw. But, it really comes down to who people believe. And did they actually see anything? One person claims to have seen something. That, I think, speaks volumes. That's a lack of actual evidence of physical abuse. Obviously, in domestic violence cases, people don't necessarily see actual physical violence, but you have to take that in consideration with everyone else's testimony and sort of see what is lacking in the testimony as well.
Well, that's the question, right, Dr. Pearson? Because Amber Heard, you heard from Camille Vasquez earlier today in her closing argument from last week, said if you believe Amber Heard, then you have to believe that everybody else who took the stand and testified in Johnny Depp's case was not telling the truth and was a liar and was willing to protect Johnny Depp at all costs. Do you see it as simple as that? I mean, what's your take? Because again, when you look at the testimony of Johnny Depp's witnesses, they were favorable to him, and clearly for a reason.
And, you know, I agree that you need to look at the totality of the evidence. I mean, we're not just looking at what people said, but we're also looking at documents. And, you know, there's a couple documents that are telling to me. One is the document of the letter from Amber Heard's a divorce attorney asking for a whole lot of financial support and financial support for her friends. And then immediately after that, after the deadline and that letter passes, she goes in for a domestic violence restraining order, ex parte. So I think, to me, you have to look at all of the evidence. You can't just be looking at what people are saying. But I do think that that listening to the testimony, that you start to see things line up for Johnny Depp. And you see those threads starting to be pulled together. We saw Isaac initially, and so we placed him where he was. And then looking in the context of now, over time, who was the one that was making those phone calls to Johnny? It was Amber. Amber was the one that was persisting. Who was the one that was preventing him from leaving the room and to get away from Amber? It was Amber that was persisting. It wasn't Johnny that was persisting. So I think that you have to sort of see these threads and how they line up over time.
You talk about the phone call, so we just heard Isaac Baruch's take on it. Here's Amber Heard describing the same phone call. Let's see if it lines up with what we just heard.
In January of 2015, Danish girl, you're filming in London, is that correct?
Yes, that would have been January 2015.
Okay. Now, we heard some testimony from Isaac Baruch earlier about a telephone call that you had with Mr. Depp. Do you recall that call?
I do.
Can you please tell the jury, and remember to tell them what Mr. Depp was saying on that call? And you can give the back. I didn't mean to cut you off on the context. Go ahead.
Is it okay to... The nature of the conversation was pleasant. Friendly, fine, normal. And then Johnny stopped making sense with it. Like, he'd start a sentence and then trail off and act confused when I would be confused. And that pattern kind of increased pretty dramatically in a short amount of time. And I was in a hotel room in London speaking to him in Los Angeles. And the phone, what I assumed, cut off. I thought it was a connection issue. And I remember getting out of bed and walking into the bathroom to get something, and I was redialing him. And in the span of that short amount of time we had been disconnected, it was minutes, not even minutes. I called him back thinking the phone had been disconnected, and he answered, and he said, how could you tell me that? How could you say that to me? Who the is he? Who the is he? And he asked me that a few times, and I was so confused. I didn't understand what he was talking about. I expressed that to him. He says, who is the guy, the one in New York that you're
Regatta, a very different interpretation there and a very different what led up to this call and reaction. So now you heard how Isaac interpreted it, and you're hearing Amber talk about it. What's your take?
My take is, who do you believe? A lot has been said about the way Ms. Heard testifies. A lot has been said about her believability, mostly due to how she testifies. She's speaking clearly, but a lot of times it seems to be simply directed at the jury in a way that seems like a performance almost. And there's been a lot of commentary on how she testifies, and it really depends on if the jury finds her believable. I think Isaac was very believable. He didn't seem to be exaggerating. He seemed to be just telling what he saw, how he thought it was. Whereas, Mrs. Heard's testimony in totality does leave one to question sometimes if it is in fact believable. For instance, crying but not actually having tears, and just making lots of faces and this type of thing. So if the jury in fact finds her believable, then they'll credit this testimony. But Isaac seems very believable, so it's just a matter if they believe her or not.
All right. Well, maybe we'll get an answer later today. We'll see. Hard to predict when juries would come back, especially in this kind of case. But we'll keep a very careful eye on that courtroom feed. And when we come back, we're actually going to go to one of our reporters who's on the ground in Fairfax County, Virginia. Stay with us.
Why does it have to be like that? Why does it have to be like that? Why does it have to be like that? What the fuck, dude? Why? Unfucking believable. Unfucking believable. Why? Just fucking why, dude?